Hi, I'm Stu Davies, Ocean Caring Digital Strategist. This podcast dives into the real stories behind ocean caring brands and organisations. Welcome to A Drop in the Ocean. Each episode explores the wins, challenges and lived experiences of those working to protect our seas, from grassroots campaigners to global initiatives. But it's more than just those stories. We're also going to connect these change makers with marketing, communications, AI, storytelling and strategy experts to share their insights and help us all amplify our missions. One drop in the ocean becomes many. Let's make some waves together. And welcome to A Drop in the Ocean. I am super stoked and super excited about this month's episode. I've got Serge Dedina, the founder and executive director of WILDCOAST. Now, I'll just read you a little bit of Serge's extensive bio. He's the executive director of WILDCOAST, a huge ocean conservation organization in the United States, author of 3 books. You've got a PhD in geography at the University of Texas. You've received the Peter Benchley Hero of the Sea Award, and you were the mayor of Imperial Beach, California. And I believe your mum's from Cornwall as well. So Serge, welcome to the show.
Yeah, my mom was from London. After the war, my mom's most vivid memory is driving down to Cornwall and seeing this, being excited because, during the war, they couldn't see the sea. So I think that fervor that my mother had for the ocean, and my family now, they're surfers and sailors in Cornwall, and really is translated to the stoke that I have for ocean conservation and WILDCOAST. So yeah, we're really stoked to be here. And really, when you think about ocean conservation and coastal protection, whether it's locally or in California or in Mexico or Africa, it's really about how much passion you have and how much fervor and desire you have to make sure that you can access the coast and ocean, that you can use it, that we can enjoy the wildlife. So that's really what WILDCOAST is about. It's really about protecting these amazing ocean spaces, the amazing ocean wildlife, and making sure people have access to this resource. They're not pushed away by conflict, by pollution, by mega development, by all the things that are going on today and climate change, that are happening that impact this resource.
Yeah. So I bumped into you and saw you on a panel and saw you speaking at the Blue Earth Summit in London earlier this year, and I just got very excited speaking to your colleague Anne, and then yourself. So for our listeners who might not be aware of WILDCOAST, so you're based in the United States. Just tell us a little bit more about your organization and what you're up to and the impact that you're having.
Yeah, so WILDCOAST, I co-founded WILDCOAST in 2000, 25 years ago, with a guy named Wallace J. Nichols, who later went on to write a book called Blue Mind, a sea turtle biologist. I was a gray whale. I just done a PhD on gray whales in Mexico along with my wife, Emily. And so we founded WILDCOAST to really make sure that we could protect the most iconic, globally important coastal and ocean space left on the planet. In this case, we were operating out of a base of California and interested in that whole, what we call the blue superhighway from, the North Alaska all the way down to southern Mexico and beyond. This Pacific superhighway that goes from where blue whales, gray whales, humpback whales, sea turtles, dolphins, whale sharks are migrating along the Pacific. And so we formed this team to really make sure that we were working with people, with communities, with governments to protect these areas that back then were at risk. So I had done a PhD in Baja, California, this remote desert wilderness that looks like, think of a cowboy movie or a Western movie, but set next to the Pacific Ocean. So mountain lions and ranchers, cowboys, fishermen next to gray whales breaching in the ocean. And so we formed WILDCOAST really with the idea of, let's create a team that works in the U.S. and Mexico and Latin America now that is doing conservation from the ground up, working with salty fishermen and ranchers and people on the ground to protect these iconic resources, whether or not they're leopard shark breeding sites in San Diego and La Jolla, where we have a marine protected area, to these gray whale lagoons in Baja, California, these vast lagoons that fill up with spouting gray whales in the winter and just inhabited by salty. Think of old school Cornish fishermen, right? These are like these old crusty fishermen, right? With funny accents and wooden skiffs and who treat whales like cows, to these sea turtle nesting beaches in southern Mexico in the state of Oaxaca, where you can get up to 1 million sea turtles laying their eggs a year on these gorgeous white sand beaches fronted by wetlands and mangroves where you have crocodiles and ocelots in the rainforest. I mean, just extraordinary places, right? These truly wild places. And that's really the idea. So we're a 30-person team based in San Diego and Mexico with offices strung along the Pacific coast of Mexico and about a budget of about $4.5 million. But we tend to be a smaller group with a big impact. And that's our focus, is obsessively focusing on what it actually takes to actually have an impact. What does it take to protect these iconic places and then protect the animals that live there? And now really address climate change through natural solutions, addressing climate change really from the ground up.
Yeah, I mean, I was blown away with just how much you guys were doing, and how many different projects you were involved with, and the impact of it all. I just thought, yeah, it was absolutely inspiring. So you've spent decades fighting for the ocean. Serge, what pulled you first in?
Yeah, so I think this family story though, and I think it's really important. So my dad was in Paris in the late 1930s, Jewish family. My grandmother, Lottie, decided that Hitler wasn't going to be very good for the Jews. And then my dad just said his uncle showed up in a car one day, and they got on a boat and came to him. Actually, they came to America on tourist visas, ended up leaving and having to go to Canada, but came back. And then during the war was in New York, right? And my dad said that his formative sort of memories, and I have photos of this before the war, were being at the beach, right? Like being at the beach in France with their families, gorgeous photos. But for my mother, it was the same thing. She was in London during the war, being bombed, had to be sent away, like many children. And I think, again, this image, I actually wrote a story about her, why she loved the beach and the importance, how that played into my role as a conservationist. And again, going with my Uncle Ken down south of London towards Cornwall and seeing the shimmering sea, but also the barbed wire there, the fact that the sea was forbidden. It was a danger zone, right? Think about London during the war. The ocean represented threat. It's the Germans. And then my parents ended up meeting in London and then ended up moving to California in the early 1960s. And for my dad and mom, I get kind of emotional thinking about it. Showing up on the beaches of Malibu in the early 1960s in Southern California, my dad said he felt like a millionaire, right? Like you were hanging out literally with the Hilton family on the beach. It was pre-hippie California, and then that turned into the late 60s during my childhood. We were on the beach with all the rest of the hippies and surfers, camping up and down the California coast at Big Sur, right? Like it was exactly what freedom meant. For me, the coast and ocean meant freedom. And, whereas I was in Malibu or up in Big Sur, or then later started surfing, we moved to the U.S.-Mexico border, a place called Imperial Beach, where I became the mayor and where I started WILDCOAST from. I'd be out surfing with gray whales and bottlenose dolphins. And then discovered my dad started taking us down to Baja, California, these areas where we still work, right? And literally have an image of just watching spouting gray whales off this desert coast while I was surfing perfect waves. And fishermen, these salty fishermen, were bringing us lobster to eat that we were cooking on a campfire. I mean, it's as good as it gets. But so that was really the idea behind the ocean, and my love for the ocean. But that crystallized around the idea that in Imperial Beach, where we moved in 1971, more than 50 years ago, this little blue-collar biker beach town on the U.S.-Mexico border, a rough and tumble beach town, like something out of a movie, right, or a novel. Our mayor then decided that we were going to turn this open space, the Tijuana Estuary, which is now a national wildlife refuge, into a yacht marina and high-rise condos. So the place we loved the most, where I went every weekend, my parents, was going to be destroyed. And my mom and dad got involved in the effort to protect that. And that was my childhood, was involved in my family in the fight to protect it. And that crystallized in 1980 when I was in high school, and it sat in front of bulldozers and gotten beat up by thugs to stop this development from happening. it got turned into a national wildlife refuge in 1980. That was our first victory, right? But that was really my entire childhood, was stopping marine development in this Tijuana estuary, and then what is now San Diego Wildlife Refuge, just South San Diego Bay. That was proposed to be a yacht marina and condos. We stopped that. And then the Surfrider Foundation, a global organization that helps fight to save surf breaks. It was first victory was stopping a breakwater project in Imperial Beach when I was in high school and college, right? So the entire childhood was like, oh my God, I live in this amazing place surrounded by ocean and wildlife, and somebody's going to destroy it. Not like maybe this will happen, to the point where the breakwater was, they started dropping rocks, the Army Corps of Engineers, and thanks to a lawsuit and some really prominent biologists, that was stopped, right? So I think for me, the thing was, we've got this great resource, and there are people that can't wait to destroy it. And I think that's the genesis of sort of like the love for the ocean, but also like this understanding that you can lose it. Also, I think this idea from my parents' migration story and what they suffered in Europe and what they felt like the loss was, this idea that the ocean and beach represent freedom, right? This idea that this profound sense of this place where you are absolutely free, you are equal to everyone else, and you're at the mercy of this gorgeous ocean, and that we need it to be happy and right, have a good life, right? Those of us, this idea behind Blue Mind, right? How the ocean changes us. So I think that's what drives me, this idea that we have people that if you try to destroy the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, you're put in jail. If you're a giant developer or a multinational and you want to destroy a national park, someone may give you a medal and give you a permit to do it. I think that's the disconnect. So yeah, that's what drives me.
Your connection to the ocean and a family history of activism has driven you there. So, look, you're working across borders from California to Mexico. What's the shared story of those coasts that you're seeing?
Yeah, so something that I think we tend to dismiss as sort of like we're on land. We go, oh, there's a nice beach here, right? The beach is a place you put your towel, but then unless you're a sailor or a fisherman, you're out on the ocean, an ocean swimmer, maybe surfer, you're really missing the vast extent of this blue wilderness, which is the wilderness. People, someone gets attacked by a shark or something happens in the ocean, you forget, it isn't safe. It's a wilderness. You're at the subject of Mother Ocean and Mother Nature, right? And so for California and the whole west coast of basically North America and then down into South America, you've got what's called the Blue Superhighway. You've got this shared Serengeti of the sea, these giant ocean animals, blue whales, humpback whales, fin whales, killer whales, gray whales, leopard, whale sharks, right? Big schools of sharks that are moving north and south. And then in California, we have leatherback turtles that are swimming across the ocean from Japan. And so that's really the idea behind Conservation Without Borders and WILDCOAST, is that if we want to protect these species down in Mexico that use these fairly undeveloped areas that don't exist except like in Western Australia and undeveloped parts of the world, and protect them off California, we need to work across the border. We need to work with people on both ends of the migratory chain. So we're protecting these key ecosystems, whether or not they're kelp forests in Southern California, where these gray whales and blue whales are swimming through, and then they're feeding grounds or birthing grounds in Mexico. And so that's how these things connect. I grew up on the U.S.-Mexico border, and frankly, when I was a kid, you hear a lot about the border now and wall and soldiers. We used to just ride our bikes across the border and eat tacos and playas to Tijuana by the sea. And then I grew up surfing in Baja. We'd go before school, right? We'd drive south and go surf northern Baja, California. I don't even think we brought an ID. Like it was my dad's 64 Volvo, right? So there's this, if you live on the border and you work in this binational, bicultural region, it's really a shared region for all of us who speak Spanish. I learned to speak Spanish. But also we're acutely aware of the wildlife that are crossing this border. And we have these wetland ecosystems and ecoregions. We have coastal chaparral. And then you've got these giant lagoons and mangrove forests in Baja, California. But all these species are interconnected. They're all sharing these ecosystems, whether it's within Mexico or California or the area from Alaska down to the Galapagos, where some of these species are going. So I think we've learned a lot more of that. And there's a person named Barbara Block at the Stanford University. She is a brilliant scientist, had been really started this project to tag these large ocean animals. So we've learned a lot more about how these animals are using this migratory space and the shared coastline in the last 20 years. And I think it's a lot to do with the work of these scientists that are really providing this public resource to show us that we're really lucky to have this resource, but we have to make sure we're protecting these areas where these animals are going.
Well, yes. I mean, the amazing organisms we share this planet with don't really understand or care about the lines we draw on maps. So it's credit to you for stepping into those places. So Serge, 25 years of impact. What are you most proud of?
Yeah, so 25 years, a lot of traveling, a lot of time in the water, a lot of time on the beach, a lot of time was working with really amazing people. But I started my international conservation career really doing my PhD along my wife, Emily. And it was really a simple question, was to ask, there was a spectacular success story of gray whales coming back from near extinction in the 1950s, and actually from the 19th to the 20th century. These animals that use these giant lagoons, 3 giant lagoons on the Pacific coast of Baja, California, this peninsula that sticks 1,000 miles out, sort of south of California. The other side, you have the world's aquarium, the Gulf of California, Sea of Cortez. They had been extirpated by American whalers. And so their coming back from their extinction was really interesting in knowing about it. So my wife and I bought a trailer, an old 1960s vintage trailer, got a 1990, I think it was a 1987 Ford F-150 4-wheel drive, 6-shift, 6-cylinder, and our dog, our Australian Shepherd, Chip, and then drove down 600 miles to San Ignacio Lagoon and put our trailer on the shore of the lagoon and said, let's ask questions about how do people work with whales, right? What does conservation mean? How do these whales come back? And what does conservation look on the ground? And it was this is back 30 years ago when the rancher fishermen we lived with communicated by CB radio, right? So they were like, who are these crazy gringos, Americans that showed up with their dog, like asking stupid questions, but they're the best form of entertainment we've ever had. So let's have them travel with us to go fishing. And if they get stuck in the mud, we'll probably have to get them out and we can laugh about it. So that was life being a graduate student on the edge of San Ignacio Lagoon. But it really answered an important question about conservation. And that is, unless you work with people to protect nature and you respect local livelihoods and figure out how to get people to work with animals, not against animals, then you have very little chance of protecting these species. And that's what happened with gray whales, that ultimately the Mexican government and these fishing communities, very isolated fishing communities, worked together to make sure that the whale watching industry, this growing whale watching industry, was really controlled for and by local residents. So these salty, old school fishermen who were inhabiting some of these old whale camps, right? Like one family we lived with, they lived in a camp that was used for trying out the fat, burning up the fat of these of the whales to get the whale oil back in the 1800s. They make a good living now from whale watching. They have exclusive access to these permits. So there was a whole sort of like growth of this political and cultural sort of ecosystem that fostered conservation. So in 30 years ago, in 1994, when the Mitsubishi Corporation proposed building a giant 150,000 hectare vast salt harvesting facility on the edge of this lagoon that was also a Mexican national park and became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the people that fought it were the fishermen who sustainably harvest lobster and abalone and these salty gray whale fishing guides, right? Like I said, we make a good living. Why would we want an industrial salt harvesting facility? So I think I helped, my wife and I basically discovered that project. So we were there before we started WildCoast. And our first projects in WildCoast with Wallace J. Nichols and I were working with our partners on the ground, local residents, other organizations, to protect this place that we found out was still under threat. And so we did a series of conservation, what are called easements and zoning area concessions that protected about 150,000 hectares of this area. We did a concession that protected every inch of the shoreline, so you can't develop it. It's all deeded back to the National Park Service for conservation. And in doing that, we secured investments from philanthropic foundations that set up an economic trust fund for local residents. So if they agreed to do a conservation easement or protect land they owned, they would get access to this investment fund that could support their eco businesses. So it was a win-win, and it's 30 years later, we're still working there. I've got to be down there this week, hopefully. We'll see. And with our staff that are doing things like helping put up signs for the National Park Service, training whale watching guides to speak English. But the most important thing is just this vast expanse of the desert that is not just home to gray whales, it's home to sea turtles. There's pronghorn antelope on the north shore of this lagoon. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's an amazing place. Bighorn sheep up in the mountains. It's just this vast undeveloped area, very sparsely populated, but populated by people who make a living from the environment, and that need to protect them, to work with them to foster sustainability is like, it's like a laboratory for how you do that, right? And how tenuous the job of conservation is, and how it comes down to a lot of these personal relationships and long-term ability to adapt and say, we want to do conservation, but these people are doing this, so let's figure out how to compromise. It's a really, really important place, and I go back there and I'm just amazed. You see gray whales coming, they spy hop and leap out of the water, and there's friendly whales there. Whales used to be called devilfish. Now they actually come up and you can pet them. It's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary place with extraordinary people, but it still requires a lot of work, and it's a very challenging place to work. So my heart's really there, and I see the results of the work and our partners, a whole group of people have done, and it's really heartwarming. And it's just, people there are just salt of the earth, and it's old school, and it's really wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I really admire the way that you've kind of turned to face a problem of ocean conservation, which is making sure that the locals are the key driver and the part of the solution, especially where you might have economic activity which might be harmful to your organization, but they just want to earn some money, and then WILDCOAST are going in there to transform that whole kind of cultural piece around it, or that thinking around it. Is that right?
Yeah, and I want to say we're not transforming the culture. The culture is there. We're trying to sort of work with people to sort of help foster these activities. Look, it all doesn't always work. And, we have marine protected areas off the coast of California, about 160,000 hectares of marine protected areas from Northern California down to the U.S.-Mexico border. We're working on the manage of that. We're part of a whole coalition that got those created. And I remember talking to, there's an OG, very old school salty fisherman in San Diego. He's like the godfather of fishermen in a good way. He's a really nice man, very well known. He's like, dude, I was telling him just recently, we want to work with fishermen. I know they're not happy always. And he's like, dude, they're still mad at you about that, right? Like that reserve system was started in 2012. You can't make everyone happy. I was actually riding a train to Cornwall after the Blue Summit. My buddy Hugo Tagholm, who runs Oceana UK, and we talked about that. Like, as much as he wants to work with local fishermen and fishermen in the UK, they're not happy with what they're talking about, right? Like, which is pushing back fishing. So it's not always easy. You don't always win. And, in the case of southern Mexico fishermen, some of the locals have told us, if we don't like what you do, we might put you in our jail, right? Like, it's like really clear, like, they've made it really clear that if you screw up, so you've got to be really respectful. And that's what I'm not doing this work. I've got, in the case of Oaxaca, local kids, these local brilliant kids that have, college degrees and they grew up in the community, they're doing the work. And in San Ignacio Lagoon, we have Daniel Arellano, who grew up in a town just north of there, and his dad's a local teacher, and he has a master's degree, and he's a brilliant field organizer, and is acutely aware of how things can go south and how you're always can be in trouble and in good graces at the same time. It's what it takes to work at the local level. What it takes to be a mayor as well. It's no different.
Right. Yeah. Wow. So you were a mayor. You still are a mayor, Serge? Is that correct?
So in 2014, I ran to be the mayor of Imperial Beach, California, which is the last town on the California coast. If anybody sees imagery of the U.S.-Mexico border and like ships on the coast, we're the last town on the California coast. And so it's a town of 26,000 people, 4 square miles, surrounded by open space. I helped protect. So I ran for mayor in a very grassroots campaign, knocked on like thousands of doors, and won by 43 votes, beat not a very popular man who had been kind of mean. And so just that's a part-time job. It's like being the chair of a board. It's not a full-time job. So yeah, did that for 8 years, but really with no political experience except for the experience I had doing organizing and working in conservation, right? Which at the end of the day is the kind of work we do is very political. So applied the model of a penniless nonprofit working in areas with no political power, and really applied that to a penniless broke city with no political power, and using the community, building social capital to use a kitty to get things done, right? We tore down chain link fences and cleaned up empty lots and put up pocket parks, put up murals all around the city, painted crosswalks without permits, but from the state of California is a very bureaucratic place. Just did all kinds of things to show the community that the city cared about this working class community, right? That had been felt very alienated from the city, and dropped the crime rate, attracted record investment, made it easier for people to invest in the community, and won re-election by close to 70%, passed 2 local tax initiatives by close to 70%. So really turned the city around, and just applying this idea that get shit done, work for the community. And it was a lot of fun, but pretty exhausting. And I'm glad I'm back to doing conservation all the time. Right. But really rewarding experience.
I mean, yeah, credit to you, Serge. So, Serge, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the mission and the impact of WILDCOAST. I mean, clearly you've achieved incredible, measurable results, from mangrove restoration, protecting millions of sea turtle hatchlings. What's been the key to your organization creating that impact at such scale across so many projects?
Yeah, so, our mission is to conserve coastal and marine ecosystems and address climate change through natural solutions. And so we work really specifically to protect places. So, protecting places, helping them, either governments set up protected areas, parks, underwater, marine protected areas, reserves, conservation concessions. We own 40 miles of coastline, and then really now carry out climate change through natural solutions. I think for us, the key is focus on key places, focus on the few things that have a big impact. So focusing on developing protected areas, and then 2, focusing on governments helping manage them. So it's not just enough to have paper parks. There's this term, paper parks, and as the world goes to 30 by 30 governments, and right now in Belém and in Brazil, all the people are, yes, do more protected areas. And then we're like, great, you helped protect an area. We have the money and resources, and now we'll work on the ground to actually make those operational. So that's really why we have had a success in helping to support the protection of 38 million acres, or about 12 million hectares of open space in these coastal and ocean ecosystems, and also help manage them, is because relentless focus on making sure that 90% of the things that you're focused on, you're focused on the 10% of the things that have the most impact. That's the thing. And so that's what I work on, our team building, and then also really our conservation focus is stop the bullshit. Lots of people, I call it meetingism, reunionismo. There's a lot of meetings, a lot of people love doing policy, and that's great. But we were trained by a great group of sort of very experienced conservation professionals from the state of California called the Resources Legacy Foundation, some really old school, one guy who'd been the Undersecretary of Resources for California. And they're obsessive about identifying how you do policy by saying, this is a problem on the ground in case for us for conservation. Something needs to be fixed. So use a lot of fix that, right? And so that's what we've really focused on. Here's a problem on the ground. Let's fix that and work on it so that it actually helps improve biodiversity and help manage the protection of this area. So I'll give you an example. In Southern California, we're one of the wealthiest places on earth. We've got these underwater parks and marine protected areas in some of the world's wealthiest areas. So just here, not too far from where I'm talking right now, is La Jolla, California, a gorgeous coastal community, like something out of a movie. It's the Bel Air or Beverly Hills of ocean, coastal areas in San Diego. And amazing ocean resources, marine protected areas. It's the worst area for ocean poaching in the United States, right? So you've got these guys that come in and they know they can steal $30,000 worth of lobster in one night by taking lobster from these marine protected areas that are no fish, no take areas. And so we put up radar units, marine monitor units to actually track and identify those guys, right? So an algorithm will help then ping via your phone or an app to say, hey, poaching's going on, and we can notify California Fish and Game, California Fish and Wildlife Wardens. And then we train judges and district attorneys or prosecutors to not ignore these cases, but to actually prosecute them. So we've had a good success record of working with lifeguards and our fish and game wardens to basically, and then judges and prosecutors to say, these cases are important to prosecute, and you also need, when you're a judge, you need to understand that this is something that's serious, right? So that's something where it's ongoing. It's an ongoing process, but I think that's something that highlights like the need to be obsessively focused on what's going on the ground and keep your eyes open and have a constant presence in the water and on the coast.
Yeah, and then you've gone to the end-to-end of the cycle of whatever's impacting that place.
Right, exactly. And then to monitor to actually see what's happening. So right now, the idea is, and then there's Ocean Science Trust is an amazing organization in California. They're actually doing the basic science monitoring of these areas to see if the fish are coming back. I guess the key thing is if it's not working, then you've got to try to change your policy. And what we found in California is that some of the areas may not be big enough to really help fish come back in the numbers we want to. Whereas in Mexico and southern Baja, California, we have a place called Cabo Pomo. I was just out last week, and fish have come back more than 500%. It's considered one of the world's most successful marine reserves. And we were in the water with this giant school of giant jacks, and like thousands and thousands of fish just spinning around in a circle. And that's because it's big enough to sustain, larger fish populations. And now it's got more than 15 years of no fishing. And the locals, these crusty bro dude fishermen, it's an amazing success story, make a good living from taking people to go whale watching. They got big giant trucks and tractors, and they tow their boats down the beach, but dude, they're not fishing, they're taking people to go snorkeling and diving. So it's a great example of how, you need all these types of factors to protect fish. But in the case of La Jolla, there's a thriving diving and kayaking community that make a good living also from taking people to see this no-take zone. And so I was swimming there this summer in a place called La Jolla Cove. It's a marine reserve. I can see schools of taupe sharks, right, in the middle of this urban environment, right? It's amazing. So, but it takes a lot of work on the ground and trying to work with people and making sure you're stopping the threats. That's a key thing. Look, and the other thing is I tell these kids that I hire out of college, your job's not to be everybody's friend. At the end of the day, you may have to be unpopular and make people uncomfortable. You may have to say truth to power, and you may have to do things that people are going to get mad about because they're screwing up or they're messing up or attacking, killing animals. So that's always a challenge, right? Your job's to focus on the mission and nature, not to make apologies for bad human behavior.
Yeah, wow. Brilliant and inspirational, Serge. So, Serge, we're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we're going to start talking about deep diving into some of your campaigning and communications successes. So we'll be back very shortly. You're listening to A Drop in the Ocean, the podcast that brings together ocean changemakers and digital communications experts, helping us all amplify our impact. If you've got a story to tell, or you're a digital communications expert who loves the ocean, then I would love to hear from you all. Get in touch with me on stu-davies.com. Let's all amplify our impact. Okay, and welcome back to A Drop in the Ocean. And with me is my guest, Serge Dedina from WILDCOAST, who's the founder and executive director. So, Serge, What I'd really like to do in this second session is deep dive into some of the amazing campaigns and communication successes that WildCoast have had. You've run huge campaigns such as Protect the Locals, Defend Cabo Pulmo, Don't Eat Turtles campaign, ethical whale watching, marine debris at the border. I mean, you've done so much. What's the anatomy of an effective campaign in your world? Some of them have been so successful. How can you share that with our audience?
Yeah, I got lucky growing up on the U.S.-Mexico border, sort of being immersed in these grassroots campaigns when I was a kid, but seeing the power of media, right? The importance of communication, talking to the media when I was sitting in front of bulldozers when I was 15, but watching the message go south, things not working out. But also this effort to save San Ignacio Lagoon 25 years ago, 30 years ago, involves some of the world's largest conservation organizations. And I was able to take like the Washington Post and CNN and all these people out in the field, work with the Los Angeles Times. So got very, very good sort of immersion in why media is important and why clear, focused communications for the environment is so essential. But also, who's the spokesperson? I think that's key. And so with WildCoast early on, I think within like a year of our founding, 2 years of our founding, and this back in 2002, we're funded by the David and Lucille Packard Foundation that's sort of headed by Julie Packard, who runs the Monterey Aquarium, is an amazing ocean conservationist. And they were really supportive of our work, helped us co-found WildCoast. And so they gave us some money to work with a group called the Spin Project. And they were this good group of consultants that were training the people in Appalachia to stop mountain type removal. So they were super hardcore, very smart about how you carry that campaign, but also the fact that you use local, like very grounded grassroots spokespeople for campaigns. So we had this issue, and Wallace J. Nichols and I, he was a sea turtle biologist. I was studying gray whales. We started WildCoast. He was trying to study sea turtles that were being eaten into extinction. So the dirty secret of all these amazing places we worked is that people love to eat sea turtles, even though it was illegal. And we're eating sea turtles into extinction. It was feeding into a black market in these big cities in northwest Mexico, Tijuana, even in San Diego. I talked to a guy who later became the mayor of Tijuana, one of Mexico's biggest cities. He's like, I can't eat sea turtle. There were these sea turtle feasts that were happening. It was crazy. And they were eating sea turtles to the tune of 30,000 turtles a year. And to give Jay credit, what he did was, and we both learned people love sea turtles, but this love for sea turtles turned into this obsessive sort of like fixation on these sea turtle we call orgies. These guys who get together and have these big, drunk fests and eat all kinds of sea turtles. It was a symbol of power, and it was a ritual. Like people would show how powerful they are by eating sea turtles. And so we started a campaign using local kids and fishermen who love sea turtles or from these communities to be the spokespeople for a Don't Eat Sea Turtle campaign. So we used the power of media in Mexico. It's a monopoly of media, so you can reach a lot of people. So we'd go to Mexico City with these salty fishermen. Then we realized that people were eating sea turtles during Lent because they thought they were fish and not reptiles. So we did a whole campaign around using priests to convince people not to eat sea turtle in Lent. And we even went to Mexico City when the Pope was there and made a big display of asking the Pope to declare sea turtles a forbidden food, right? And just the media loved it, right? But we always did it, we have Jay, for example, as a scientist, or me, and then with these local sort of very authentic spokespeople, and the media really picked up on that. So that was really how the DNA of our media campaigns. And we applied that again and again. We stopped a very big, giant marina development project along the Baja California coastline, using whale watching guides, for example, and fishermen to oppose this project, put it on the Wall Street Journal, but we always have very strong scientific or economic sort of facts to back up this case, but also made by these authentic spokespeople. And I think that played out in a place called Cabo Pulmo, this marine reserve I was mentioning, the world's most successful marine reserve, when that later became a failed Spanish development company proposed building a giant city in the desert, an area where there's nothing around. I was just there. And this marine reserve, right? And so we became part of a coalition, but kind of broke off because with Greenpeace and another group called the Mexican Environmental Center, because we felt like this coalition was a little too conservative. And so really went on the warpath with the media, used a Mexican wrestler, El Hijo del Santo, the son of the saint. Mexican wrestlers are these iconic sort of cultural symbols in Mexico. And so he became a spokesperson of this campaign. There was a public forum in Cabo San Lucas, where the government actually engineered a group of these fake sort of protesters in favor of this project that were being paid by the government to attack him. It was all televised. It was insane. Like, they chased him out, one of Mexico's most famous cultural figures, and they almost like grabbed him and beat him up. It was super heavy. Anyway, it galvanized support against the project and helped us like negotiate with the government along with others, and they eventually canceled the first iteration of it. And then the second part then the Chinese, all of a sudden during a different administration, the Chinese government came using a former Mexican president. They proposed the same project. And so we put up billboards. I'd always wanted to do this because I was, Tiananmen Square with the tanks rolling through these protesters when I was like, I think it was in the 80s, were like a haunting memory. So we had a billboard in Cabo San Lucas that had these Chinese tanks with, hammer and sickle, and Emiliano Zapata, the ardent Mexican revolutionary, in his revolutionary hat and his bullets, stopping the tanks surrounded by ocean animals, right? And people went apeshit over that. Either they were really, really happy that we were doing it, or some of our supporters got very angry and very upset, like, hey, you're causing a lot of problem. It's interesting how it worked out. Like, we just put up a billboard, and, the Chinese government was planning on destroying one of the world's most important marine reserves. And people they didn't get mad at the Chinese government. They got mad at us, right? And so it was pretty interesting. And then it turned out it went on, this is right when social media was developing, went on Facebook, and the old school Chinese pro-Chinese communists in Mexico, of which there apparently are, they also just blew this thing up. And how dare you criticize the communists? And we love the China. It was interesting. Anyway, it turned into there's no bad press. And this polemical sort of like debate really allowed us to go negotiate with the government and meet with the Environment Agency, and eventually the project was killed. Again, the whole coalition, our own coalition members were not happy about this. And ocean conservation tends to be a very conservative, kind of elitist institution supported by some big organizations and work with big government agencies. They're not interested always in the feisty punk rock style campaigns that we did. Would get mad about it a little bit, but I didn't answer to them. I answered to the ocean, right, and our donors and our team. So it all worked out, And I was just there. It's still an amazing marine reserve. These fishermen make a living from now taking people to see this ocean reserve. So it all worked out. But I think we still focus on the media. It's harder in the United States, where social media has taken over traditional media. But in Latin America, and especially Mexico, we can reach, because it's still a monopoly and people still get their media through television and radio, for example, we can reach 90% of the country and just reach tens of millions of people with a very good campaign. And so we do that all the time, whether it's talking about mangrove conservation and featuring women who are protecting mangroves, or scientists studying coral reefs and coral bleaching, or the issue of pollution on the U.S.-Mexico border. It always revolves around these very authentic, very passionate, successful activists or conservationists who are leading this fight. That's the important thing.
Yeah, I think where anybody is, for anyone who's trying to make a difference in their local area, building a relationship with your local journalists, finding out who they are, have a conversation with them, tell them what you're up to. Send them a press release when you're doing something, and just start. It helps people get those messages out there. I think that's such an important lesson for any aspiring activists, Serge. But Serge, you've worked on a lot of, why I say hard campaigns. What's been the hardest and messiest behind the scenes of your big public-facing campaigns?
Well, I think this Cabo Pulmo thing, this thing with the Chinese government, was probably the hardest. It was, phone calls from our funders who were concerned about the conflict. I think it was managing this crazy assault on this Mexican wrestler, El Hijo del Santo, the son of the saint, and dealing with all the acrimony and, frankly, the fear of being attacked. We work in remote places in Baja California. We have to be very careful. We wanted to make sure we weren't, the reality violence against environmentalists in Mexico is a real thing. Violence against conservationists in Latin America, especially Central America, is a real thing, and South America as well. And so we have to be careful. That issue of violence is something that we have to face. And frankly, we've dealt with acrimony at every level of every campaign. Right now, we're working on the U.S.-Mexico border to deal with this horrible pollution that comes across from Tijuana, one of Mexico's largest cities, into the coast and ocean, where you can get 50 million gallons of sewage a day being discharged in the ocean. It's the craziest, the worst pollution in North America. Plus, you get toxic waste and all kinds of plastic and trash being discharged into what is 100,000 acres, or about 30,000 acres of ocean protected areas and coastal protected areas. So a horrible mess. And you think again that fighting this would be seen as great, but there are folks who get mad about it. I had a governor of Baja California carry out 3 press conferences denouncing me. And instead of this is the first of Trump administration, our U.S. consul in Tijuana supporting me and saying, hey, we got this American citizen is being attacked by Mexican authorities. She said, what's your problem? Why are you doing this? Right? Like it was, and I was told not to go to Baja California when this was happening. So it can get pretty heavy, and our staff have been attacked. We got on the wrong side of another governor of Baja California and the environmental minister, and that had implications for our legal status in Mexico because they wouldn't sign a letter declaring that we are a legitimate organization. We had to work that for a while. So all these issues can have implications for now, especially in the United States, but even in Mexico, your legal status, your nonprofit status. In the United States, obviously the Trump administration is going after organizations and foundations. So all of this in Mexico, that happened during the last administration where the President Lopez Obrador, it's more of an old school populist kind of socialist from 1970s. It's very old school. The new president, President Steinbob, to be honest and be clear, that's not happening. It's been a complete reversal. They've really opened up their arms to working once again with organizations. We have a very good relationship with their administration, so it's all changed. But we're all very worried about it in the United States. It's definitely something we're concerned about: recriminations and harassment, and then going after organizations from every stripe of the nonprofit and civil society.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think, just before we started recording, you mentioned that there's a particular live issue at the moment in the north of Mexico. That's, some of your staff are having to deal with. Did you want to talk about that, Serge?
Yeah. So, the issue of safety and security, whether it's in the United States or in Mexico or now working in Colombia, is something that's paramount. It's the most important thing we deal with, making sure staff have life jackets and safe boats to go out to in the water. We have a patrol boat in San Diego that makes sure the cars work, but also that we're working in Northwest Mexico, Baja California, U.S.-Mexico border, where you've got the reality of narco cartel violence, right? And mostly targeting people in cartels, but we're working on cleaning up these canyons on the U.S.-Mexico border where people disappear, where the cartels are clearly active. And then, unfortunately, what's happened is the cartel empires have been sort of untouched in Mexico, especially the last administration. The cartel empires have extended into fishing, into ecotourism. We're working in these very remote areas where you've got these gangs of cartels that are controlling fishing, for example. And so everywhere we work now, the cartels are asking about us. Our goal is to make our staff and our vehicles sort of very clear we're not a threat. That's been something we've been operating by for the last 15 years in Mexico. As we extended, we are not a threat. We are not the government. But we've had staff chased by cartel spotters, and we got the license plate of the car. It was a stolen car from the United States. And more recently, there was a cartel war in the middle of right near one of our project sites. We own 40 miles of coastline in central Baja California. It's part of a national park, but we bought the land there, and we're going down to do this week, we're going down to do a monitoring survey there and then San Ignacio Lagoon. And I just got this series of WhatsApp emails from our staffers saying, hey, this just happened. 13 people apparently are dead. They've got these crazy cartel, cowboy, narco guys. These are guys with cowboy hats and giant 4x with machine guns that are shooting each other in the desert. And so apparently 13 people were killed, and there's bodies over the desert, and the ranchers and fishermen we work with are saying, stay out of the desert, don't drive anywhere. So now all of a sudden it's like, first, I'm worried about the safety of my staff, one who lives in this area. Second, let's not go down there. How do we, make sure we do this work? So those are all real issues, and frankly highlight the tragedy of, criminal activity and narco activity. Is that, we always think, oh, it only affects the people that are working in these cartels. It affects everybody. It was just a whale watching guide in Baja, California, was just murdered because he wouldn't play along with the cartels. We've had people disappear. Someone who was a volunteer at one of our marine debris project sites on the U.S.-Mexico border in Tijuana disappeared. The son of someone who's a really good friend of mine, 18-year-old, disappeared. Young kid. And I think that highlights when you hear about these U.S. Navy blowing up ships in Venezuela or from Colombia. I know what the reality is like in these fishing communities. Some people may end up working for a cartel, not because they want to, because they have to. They may be blackmailed, they may be forced to, or they just get caught up in circumstances where they're in a boat they're not supposed to be. It's a very, very precarious thing. So that's something we're dealing with. This issue of safety and security in all our sites is really important. We stopped working in the state of Guerrero, which is north of Oaxaca. It's a southern Mexican state, which is sort of like the Honduras of Mexico because of the prevalence of violence everywhere and cartel violence. There was guerrilla violence, a really unsafe area. So we're working in Oaxaca. But, there were 3 surfers, 2 from Australia, 1 American, that were murdered in northern Baja last year. That's tragic, in an area that we'd all said, we publicly told in the surf press, do not go there if you're an American surfer or a foreign surfer, and Mexican surfers don't go there. So this is all very real and something we have to be careful about.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, it really brings it, home when you hear that story. And we do wish you and all of your staff to be extremely safe, Serge, during this time. So what I've seen is WILDCOAST, you work with a lot of indigenous communities, especially women-led groups, grassroots partners. How do you ensure their voices lead the storytelling or involved in the storytelling of what's going on in those places?
Yeah. So, for example, basically, I've got an amazing team. There's a lot more women than men, and so amazing team of women that are from communities in Baja California and then the state of Oaxaca. And it was because of their sort of presence in these communities, we started doing mangrove restoration. What they said was they were in the field and said, the men are fishing, but the women are really interested. They're forming these sort of collectives and co-ops to harvest shellfish, but also they're interested in mangroves because that's where fish come from and the shellfish are harvested from. So let's work with these nascent organizations in some indigenous communities, one in Lagunas de Chicagua, it's an old national park in northern Oaxaca. You have what are called Afro-Mexican and then indigenous communities, the descendants of slaves who were there since probably the 1600s. Very interesting, very remote places. And so really our female-led staff are indigenous. We have 2 indigenous staff members. They're the ones sort of initiating this work and supporting it. And so part of this we just got a grant to work with a group of feminists. It's called Just Associates, and they specialize in working with women. So our staff just met with them, and we're helping foster a network of women's collectives and cooperatives in indigenous communities who work on mangrove restoration from throughout Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico coast, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. And I think the important thing is that it's women-led. For example, I support it, but also it's really focused on how they can support themselves, right? How they work with the media, how they advocate for themselves, how they this issue of safety is paramount. And if you see the media campaigns I was talking about, we've done just something in The Guardian, a great story about this women's collective in La Paz, southern Baja, Mexico. And it was all from the perspective of a young staffer we have who's from this fishing community, has the first woman or person in her family to go to college. She became a biologist and is working with her mom and this people from this neighborhood. So they became the subject of the story. Andrea and her mom and this women's collective, we had Vogue Mexico feature the women of this Afro-Mexican indigenous community in Lagunas de Chicagua, right? So Doña Cidi, who's the spokesperson, amazing person, she became the subject of the story. So, and that was the same thing on Mexican television. Or when we worked with the Minister of the Environment to highlight this, it was our female staff who were making this case, right? So I think that's where the issue of authenticity, and for me, it's always about how do you get the people on the ground in front of the decision makers? And I tell our staff, this issue of class, my mother grew up in class-ridden England from the 1930s and 40s, so very cognizant of class. Not something in America we're always cognizant about, but in Mexico, the issue of race and class is something that, folks from lower-income families are raised to believe that they don't always have a right to have a place, with the president of Mexico. It's not always the case. But our staff, my whole thing is, you and our community members, they need to be prepared to take the president of Mexico out in the field and talk about what the issue is. And we were just with the Ministry of Environment and our staff. The idea is that the staff working on the ground are the ones that need to be the spokesperson. And that's how we're approaching this issue of indigenous communities. And then also the women's collectives is that they're the spokespeople. We're training them to really understand how to use the system and articulate their own needs rather than depending on us. That's a key.
Okay, it's so impactful. And Serge, if there's any small NGOs or coastal groups who've got tiny budgets, what advice could you give them about running effective campaigns?
Yeah, I think I think the issue it's not about money. It's about what are the things you're doing that have an impact. You can have an impact without spending a lot of money, but how you're articulating that now in today's media landscape, you have to be very clear about sort of how you're framing things, who you're advocating for, and more importantly, pointing to the impact. That's a thing that we've got to get back to, is identifying sort of what's the resource you're talking about, what's the threat, and by eliminating this threat, how many acres or hectares will you save, what species will you save? So people really want to see that the money that they're investing actually has a result. I love the rewilding movement in the UK, the focus on bringing back wildlife. It's been really influential to me. That's why I wanted to go to Blue Earth, because I think it's so locally focused and you can see what people are doing and they're so passionate and you can point to success. That's what people are interested in. They don't understand arcane policy. They're tired of doom and gloom. They are interested in supporting locally passionate, successful organizations that can protect the area that they love, right? I think that's very important in the UK, for example. It's important worldwide. And I know that for WILDCOAST, this idea of spreading positive news. Look, I can talk about doom and gloom, cartel violence, climate change, overfishing, but the reality is what our donors respond to and the public responds to is, hey man, we just helped work with some folks in southern Mexico to restore 3,000 hectares of mangroves and preserve 15,000 hectares of rainforest, and there's ocelots there. So that's what people respond to, and that's what you have to focus on, not just focusing on the doom and gloom, more about let's build a movement to protect this place, take care of it, and here's some success that you helped support. That's more important than ever because people are tired of being bombarded with negative news, and there sure is a lot going around.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful and fantastic advice, Serge. Well, Serge, unfortunately, we have come to the end of the podcast, but just if anyone's listening and they want to support WILDCOAST or take a stand for the ocean, what's the one thing that they could do today to support you?
Well, they can follow WILDCOAST on Instagram at WILDCOAST, Costa Salvaje, and then go to wildcoast.org and make a donation. Sign up for our newsletter. Sign up to make a difference. I think that's really more important than ever. And make a commitment to support your local coastal and ocean conservation organization. Whatever you're doing, get involved, get engaged. The ocean does matter. Our coastline does matter. Wild swimming, surfing, sailing, being with the water matters. And we got to do everything we can to protect our wild blue spaces.
Well, Serge, thank you so much. If I do ever make it to California, I'm definitely coming to see all of these places you've been talking about, and hopefully have a surf with you.
Dude, you're welcome. We'll get you some good waves, and we'll see some wildlife as well.
There we go. All right, you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much. Amazing story and amazing insights you've shared with the audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Stu. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to A Drop in the Ocean, the podcast that brings together ocean change makers and digital communications experts, helping us all amplify our impact. New episodes will be available from your streaming platform of choice. Please do like, comment and share and help us spread the message. See you next time.